Good morning. This is the Being Your Own CEO Success Circle. This morning, we're going to talk about communications and speaking. My name is Lolan, and in my coaching and consulting work, I help solopreneurs get focused and motivated as we take them and their business to the next level with a few simple structures and some pretty easy technology. We'll be right back right after this. So greetings everyone, wherever you are, and welcome to the Being Your Own CEO Success Circle. It's intended to support solopreneurs. We got together because we enjoy each other's company, and we also like exchanging ideas and information, and we do lots of experimenting. We all give and receive support. You can discover what we stand for by reviewing our operating principles on this page. I want to welcome our viewers and invite them to check in by telling us what they do in the comments section off to the right. And now it's time for the members of the panel to introduce themselves. Please briefly tell us your name and where you are and what you do, and be sure to tell us something that you're excited about. So let's see who, well, Fred, how would you like to introduce yourself first, so that when we get to your piece, there'll be a separation there.
Okay, thank you very much, Laurel. I'm Fred Jones. I'm located in Victoria, or Langford, which is where Jay is as well, so I don't want to leave Jay out, on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. And I work with a lot of young people in ourfutureleaders.ca is my website. And what I'm doing is encouraging them to learn how to communicate and lead meetings and become leaders, help them prepare for what they're facing in the future. The way the world's changing, communication is going to be even more critical. So that's what I do, and we'll share some of those ideas today, apparently.
Yes, right on. So I'm so happy that you agreed to share your considerable knowledge in this area. So right on. Bill, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Graham. My site is billdoesbelize.com, where I share unbiased information, what I refer to as the unbelievable truth, to help people thinking about making a move to Belize get informed information and make the decision that's right for them. I'm going to also be doing comment tracking today. So if you are out there, we thank you for joining us and ask you to sign in. I've put this little one up. For more information on today's topic, please visit Fred's website. The link is here, but I've also posted it in the BCP chat, so people can go and check out Fred's stuff over there. And I'm looking forward to hearing it. So thank you for having me.
And thanks for your support, Bill. Always much appreciated. Yeah. Elena, are you still there?
Greetings, everyone. Coming to you from Ireland, Elena here. It's so good afternoon, I should say. Good evening. I run a website called emptynesterblog.com, helping empty nesters create their own online income. And I'm also a virtual assistant as well, wearing that hat as well. And so, I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to the topic today because, as I said before, I was having a conversation with someone not like an hour ago about one-to-ones. So I'm interested in the conversation today.
Right on. Good to have you here as usual.
Thank you.
Good morning, Jay. How are you this morning? Want to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Jay. My company is Magi Studios, and I help people get started in the world of online marketing through coach, consulting, and training. Hailing from Victoria, a suburb, I guess you can call it, Victoria, British Columbia, otherwise known as Langford or the West Shore, is our gang symbol.
What was that? Your gang symbol?
That's a W.
Oh.
West Shore.
I would have to stop and see if I can figure out how to do that.
You have to be able to do that first.
I can do that much.
Right. Now you have to turn them, flip them over.
Is it relevant where that center finger goes? Front or back?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh dear, crazy people here.
And, excited to talk about whatever it is we're talking about today.
Okay. Welcome here. And Vivek, I see you're here. Welcome here. You're going to need to unmute.
Namaste. My name is Vivek. VivekTechnology.com is my website, and I'm here after a long time. So, yeah.
It's very nice to have you.
Thank you.
Now, I have to warn or ask Bill. Oh, there's Hedi. You're just in time.
Too.
You're just in time to introduce yourself.
Yeah, in Italy. I'm in Italy, and I'm preparing my paradisointegrale.com, but it is also the house I'm living in for the summer, and we are preparing the website now a little bit nicer, and so we hope that some people will come into our international meeting point, maybe make a course, participate in a course, or just enjoy Italian landscape and nature, culture. We have everything here. And normally online we are doing the wisdomfactory.net weekly live broadcasts on Thursdays. Presently Conscious Aging season number 4.
Wow. It's season number 4. I can't believe it. Wow. Wow. So now I do need to share something with Bill. We talked about this before we came into the recording. I am not able to see everybody that's in the film strip. So I hope I've included everybody, because all I can see is four screens, but I can't see everybody. So is there anybody out there that I haven't asked?
You've gotten everyone. What are you visually seeing? Are you seeing thumbnails down the right?
Yes. Yeah.
Then you should have an arrow underneath that will allow you to bring up the people in addition.
Oh yeah, I see that. Okay. Yeah.
And to get back, you'll use the up arrow at the top.
Yeah, I found it. Right on. So for those who are watching, this is the learning process of figuring out how to make use of Zoom in an acceptable way. So I realized that maybe there was a setting that I didn't realize I needed to make before starting the Zoom. So next time it will be better. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows what we're going to talk about this morning, we had agreed that we would speak about communication principles and or speaking principles. And I just by way of introduction, I kind of wonder how many of us here wish we had a better speaking style. And Heidi's or Elena's already shared that she was kind of looking at some improvements in that regard. What about anybody else? And I could be putting my finger up first because I know there are lots of ways to improve. So what about everyone else? Anybody else thinking about improving their speaking style?
I'm pretty happy with mine. But
Yeah,
can you tell me what you mean with speaking style? Do you mean the voice, how you put the voice, or do you mean the grammar or the melody or the words and the concepts? What do you mean with that?
I would say yes. I know in my case, I say a lot when I'm searching for things. And sometimes I look like I'm watching the salamanders run across the ceiling because I'm searching. So I'm looking forward to hear what Fred has to say on how I can get rid of the ums and learn to concentrate on the camera while recalling what I really want to say.
And you kind of beat me to it, Bill, because I was chatting with Fred not long ago about this very topic. And he shared his model, and that's when I said, oh, we all need to know this. So that's kind of the reason that we have today's session. And by the way, Jay, we know you're okay. You've had radio training, for heaven's sake. So some of us haven't had that advantage. So we've got a few things to learn. So
thanks, Laulan. I appreciate it.
Boy, he comes with this radio voice. Oh dear, we do have fun here, don't we? So Fred, let's open this topic. And I did post this as a speaking style, and Heidi has opened up just what do we mean by that. And it's all about communication, and speaking is a big part of communication. So Fred, where would you like to begin? Where would you like to get us started?
Well, I'll just give you an overview of how I came up with this acronym that I call MASH-D. I've been in Toastmasters now over 14 years, and this is not something that Toastmasters advertises. It's something that I created from what I've learned in those 14 years. And MASH-D is something to remember. It's easy to remember. And then it's what does MASH and D stand for. So I'll just go through those. What I'd like to do is discuss each one, and I'm sure everyone can relate some snippet as to each one of those, what MASH-D stands for. So I'll just run through those quickly, and then we can go through one at a time. Now, the first M is, or M stands for the message. What is the message you're trying to convey? Unless you know what you're trying to convey, you end up going all around the bush and not getting down to what you're trying to give the message, which is to the second letter is A, is to the audience. So you have to know your audience. In fact, that's where we'll start, is the audience, because unless you know your audience, you probably don't know what the message is. But MASH-D just works out very well. Rather than start with A, I was going to be maybe spell something that wasn't polite, so I thought, no, I'll just start with M. So it's message, audience. Then the S stands for stories. People always remember stories. If you can tell a story about the message you're trying to give that conveys it, people remember stories. They don't remember a lot of facts and figures, but they'll always remember the story. And H stands for humor. I noticed Jay immediately uses humor. I mean, he already had us laughing a couple times just in his brief introduction. And humor is very powerful. And the last letter D stands for distractions. And that's what we try and avoid. You both mentioned, yourself and Bill mentioned, ahs and ums. That can be a distraction. Our Prime Minister of Canada uses a lot of ahs when he talks. And if you start noticing it, it is a distraction. Some people, you don't notice it that much, but ultimately, especially if you start, you'll notice some people are particularly bad at it. One of our politicians who I remember listening to him, it was Ralph Klein, who used to be the premier of Alberta. I was driving somewhere, and in 10 minutes, I heard him use about 70 ahs and ums in 10 minutes. It was totally distraction to me. He was just leaving politics, but that sort of thing we try and avoid. So that's what it stands for. So MASH-D stands for message, audience, stories, humor, and distractions. And I think the first place to start really in this is the audience, because unless you know who your audience is, you don't know what the message is. So the main points about the audience is, who is your audience? Is it one person? Is it a whole group? It could be 1,000 people, but you have to know who's in your audience before you can even start communicating with them. So what are their backgrounds? You can do research. If you're talking to 1,000 people, who are they? And what are their interests? Because if they're not interested in what you have to say, it's no use talking to them. You're wasting your time if they're not having interest. So you have to do your research on who it is. Now, that might be simply one-on-one, is just start asking questions. You know, if you're now talking, you don't say, hey, I'm the greatest a lawyer in the world, and they're not interested at all in talking about law. So find out what the interest is, and if there's anything in common. And how much knowledge do they have currently about that subject? It's no use getting in depth if you just are preliminary. So ask these questions. And also what language and terms to use. If you start using acronyms and they have no clue what you're talking about, you've lost them. So be very careful, because they have to relate to what you're talking about. If we're talking about solopreneurs, they have to understand what that is and what the term is. And also know what their challenges are. How's it going? What are their concerns, and what are they wanting to do? What are their goals? What is it they'd like to do? Unless you know that, you can't properly communicate with them. And so your research is by asking a series of questions prior to speaking. And that can be one-on-one, it can be a group. You can go and say, oh, you've asked me to do a talk. All right, what are their concerns? Just go through that. So that's really the audience. Unless you know your audience, forget it. You can't communicate.
And Fred, of course, that becomes a little more difficult when you're trying to attract a certain audience online, and I think sometimes at the beginning we have to make a number of assumptions until we actually know.
Yes, in many ways you do, but you can also create what they often say, an avatar, and say, all right, for example, I'm dealing with homeschool parents. What do I think a homeschool parent? All of us have been parent, and then ask them as well, try and find a few of them. You don't have to, in your audience. So you do have to do your research, and create an avatar, call it, George or Samantha, and say, what would Samantha, who's the parent, or what would George think, and relate. Until you can do that and put yourself in their place and understand, you cannot communicate. So even that, you don't know, but create an avatar.
Oh, so that's what you meant by an avatar. I've always referred to that as a persona, and I have created a one-pager where I've even put a picture of my avatar, Claire, and I have a whole page of what I know and what I speculate about Claire.
Yeah, and she's a solopreneur, probably.
Yes, she is.
Exactly.
And she's a certain age. She's worked for government for a long time, and now she's joining the the online world and trying to figure out what she would like to do, etc., etc. So, I mean, you can put together that persona and even name that person and give them a picture so that you've got something in your mind. So you've got something concrete in your mind when you're speaking to that person.
That's perfect. That's exactly what we're talking about. And I can relate to an author who wrote a very well received book, and that's Tim Ferriss, who wrote 4-Hour Workweek. He said that he wrote that book for 2 of his friends. That's who he was talking to, 2 people. And they were friends, and that's what he was conveying. So that was his audience when he wrote a book. And as we know, he's a very successful book in many ways. So you have to have your audience in mind before you want to communicate. If it's writing a book, if it's talking, or you want to relate. That is the key element. So I started with the A because unless that, then you don't know what the message is, which is really what the next one. So are there any comments about audience before I go on to M for message?
I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button here. I don't know if you heard that, but the those outside will have heard it. So would you repeat your question again?
Okay, the question is, are there any questions about the audience? Any comments about audience, knowing your audience, what we've covered? Anyone who wants to add anything at this time before I go on to M for message? No one's putting up their hand that I see. So let's go on to the next one.
Vivek has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, message. Okay.
I was just going to add that possibly the culture of the audience, you may also think about that, may need to think about that, because especially when it comes to message and not message, and the last part actually, humor. So some humor can be misunderstood by a different person belonging to a different culture. So there was a funny story which we had. A American person goes on explaining something to software developers. And these software developers are, of course, Indian software developers. Then he explains, and then he ends his presentation lecture with, "You do all this, and Bob's your uncle." Then one student, one software developer said, "Oh God, I didn't know I had a new uncle called as Bob." Who's this Uncle Bob? So that's the point I would like to add there. Culture and humor, audience. Yeah.
Very, very true. We have a lot of idiomatic I guess, comments that we make, and sometimes it doesn't relate, even in the same country. I'm sure you'll find that in India as well. Some people will not really. It's very true. You have to know your audience, and that includes the culture as well. Toastmasters, as an example, is in 124 countries, so that is something that often comes up, and we, discuss that. Exactly, stories like you just said, Vivek, where somebody said something and it was totally went over people's heads because they used an expression that was colloquial to that area, but not to their audience. So you have to be careful.
So Fred, it's not only cultures; it's age groups. I might relay a story. My walking partner's granddaughter came home from school, having been told that she should make note of all the funny expressions that her mother uses. And she couldn't think of any. And so my walking partner and we keep noticing every now and again, a phrase comes up a colloquial or even I mean, I can't even tell you, I can't give you an example right now because they only come up within a context and they just arise. And so we have laughingly said, oh, that's one I heard my grandmother say over and over. And who on earth would even have any idea what that means today? So it's not, I mean, I guess age groups can be considered different cultures as well. But so it's not but culture is important. What on earth does do certain things mean, and what and I think I think there's another piece that comes up in there, and that is etiquette. There's a certain sort of level of etiquette in age groups and cultures that we need to bear in mind. So there's so much to pay attention to when we talk about our audience.
And that is the key element. Unless you know your audience, it comes down to the D, distraction. They're not listening to you anymore because your etiquette isn't their etiquette or their culture isn't. So be very, very aware. And all of this needs some research when you are talking to a different group. Ask them. Unless you ask the questions, you don't know, and you're not getting your message across, which is the next one. So I'll move on to, because we can go through audience. There's so many elements in all of these, but it's just to be aware of it. Do I know who my audience is? All right. What is the message I want to deliver? And what's the purpose? The purpose can be anything. Sometimes it's just to entertain. I mean, you might be, that's why they're there. They want to be entertained, but maybe you want to inform them or you want to discuss. So it depends on how you're going to present your message, but what is it that you really want them to take away after that message? What is after that presentation or that article or that book you've written? What is it that you really want them to learn and to know once that they didn't know prior to your presentation? And is there an action that you would like them to take because of your presentation or because of your book or your article or your advertisement? And what is it you want? What action is it? Do you want them to buy something? Do you want them to join something? Do you want them to go to your website? Whatever it is, you must know what the message is. What are you trying to achieve? It's all right to say, hey, I'm the greatest ABC person, but even if you convince them that you're the greatest lawyer in the world, you still haven't told them, all right, here's an action that you can take, that I can maybe help you or you can help yourself. So messages is very important to say, well, what is it that I'm trying to achieve? Any questions about message before I go on to S for stories?
So I was going to say, Jay, this is your cue to come in and tell about the CTA.
Yeah, absolutely. So CTA stands for Call to Action. And it's basically, when it comes to writing for the web or even presenting on the web, it means what you want people to do after they've either heard your presentation or read your content or watched your video or listened to your audio. So do you want them to call, click, come by? And you can really sum up a CTA in those three action items: call, click, or come by. So call is actually physically calling someone. Click is you're getting someone to actually do something on a website, or come by where you're actually showing the address and you want them to, walk in traffic. Obviously, those three situations are, they're going to be involved with different kinds of clients or different types of scenarios. So, but yeah, absolutely. And I think it really needs to, the call to action needs to kind of flow naturally within your content, or your video. It's not like you're talking about, blue Smurfs and then all of a sudden you're selling a red Smurf. The bait and switch doesn't really work. So, and that's what bait and switch is where you're luring them into one particular niche and then you turn it around and you're selling them, it's like selling a vegan a steak. So it just doesn't work.
Ah, so that's one of the things that when we're creating a website, we need to know. But I mean, getting back to something Elena said, even with getting together one-on-one with somebody as a follow-up to a networking event, it's really, really good to be clear about all of these things within the message. So it's part of our everyday interaction with other businesses for sure.
Yeah. And so that takes me to the S, which are stories. Without stories, the chances are your audience will hardly remember anything you said. But if you can tell them about a time, a situation where whatever you're trying to convey, if you're saying, I wanted to lose weight, or I know someone who lost weight, and this is what they did, and this was the result, or I wanted somebody who's had a certain goal, whatever you can tell a story about, they will remember, that's the person who, because we are geared and wired for stories. That's how we communicated, and before we were able to write, we had stories, and it is so important. Your audience will remember how you made them feel as well. It's all about the audience. It's not about you. It's how do you make them feel, and the stories that where they can relate to. If you ever see some of the most powerful storytellers, and you'll remember them implicitly. And what does a comedian do but tell stories? I mean, that's really what they're doing. And we relate and we laugh and we find it very humorous. And we remember those humorous stories. Some of the stories we remember are from comedians. We often go back to them and say, wow, and that comes back to humor, which is the next one. And humor is not easy, but the story should be relevant to your topic. You don't want to tell them, I went on this great vacation and so on, unless you were trying to convince them they should be going on vacations and what are the benefits of that. So it's very true and very important, because figures are very quickly forgotten. You can tell them all those, but if you can tell them a story about the impact, so it rather expound on those facts or those effects that you want by telling a story which will resonate with them. And it'll make it memorable, because they'll say, that's the person who told us about the time they went to Tasmania and saw a Tasmanian devil or something, and the result. They'll remember that, which is what I did when I was in Tasmania.
And I mean, you point to the fact that we are wired that way, and really, when I think of our First Nations people here in Canada and the U.S., their history is wound up in their narrative stories. And when I worked in the Northwest Territories, people began to really recognize that in order to know the history of what happened there, we had to go to those narrative stories, and we also learned that the First Nations storytellers saw that role as being a really, really critical historical role for their people. So, I mean, this whole concept of stories and history and all of that, it is so critical, isn't it? And it still is. You're saying it still is.
When Fred was talking about stories, the one person I was thinking about who's really good at it and selling product was Roy Henry Vickers. Yes. Who's a wonderful storyteller. He's up in Tofino here in British Columbia, and he also makes some beautiful art. And one of the, we'll call it funnels, really, the way he sells a lot of his art is by having these story times on Mondays. And he'll actually even live broadcast them on Instagram and stuff. And they're really great stories. And it's funny because the topic he has will usually involve a specific animal or a specific situation, and they'll have that particular animal or that particular situation within the gallery. So if he's talking about whales, he'll have a lot of the whale art on display. So I mean, it's really brilliant, and he's a really good storyteller. But to add what Fred was saying, one thing that I find that works really well for me is telling people what it's like to have the product that you're about to sell them or the service that you're about to sell them, and also remind them what it's like not to have the product or the service, in their lives, and how having the product or the service could benefit from them or benefit them to the point where they can have what it's like to have that product or service. So it's like that circle. It's like, here's the life that you can have with this service or product. Here's the reason why this product or service is great for you, and here's what your life can be like, when you have this product or service. So I find that creates they're able to relate. It's like, oh yeah, I need that. I need that product, and that works, at least for me, really well.
I think it works for everyone, Jay. Because they can relate to it. The audience can understand and feel. Oh yeah, I've been there. I don't have that product, and I can see why I benefit from it. And once you can relate, or they can relate to what you're saying, and that's where stories come in. I like the fact that you mentioned First Nations. I do some work with emergency services, and I learned when I first arrived here on the West Coast that there are earthquakes here. And one of the earthquakes, the last big one was, I think it was around the 1600s, before the Europeans arrived. And the First Nations have stories about that earthquake.
Yeah.
And so that's where you started getting vestiges of, there have been big earthquakes here before the European arrived. And they were able to pinpoint the exact date and time because of the tsunami that was affected by that earthquake hit the rice warehouses in Japan, who then in those days kept written records. And from that time, they could tell you the date of the tsunami and work it back to exactly the date and time, that earthquake that the First Nations were talking about in their stories. So both of those, and that's why I say we're wired. That's the way we originally communicated our history, by stories, and we still do. So yes.
The other example I was thinking of, and maybe I should mention it as well. Isn't that what the Bible is full of? All of those stories from that period of time. So there is no question that we are really wired that way.
So we must use stories if we want to communicate properly. Not must, we don't have to, but to do it properly, and people will relate to those stories. And again, it has to be appropriate to your audience. And you have to know what it is you're trying to convey. So we go back to the message and the audience, but stories help. And then humor, if you can add it, that's the H. Adding humor, it's not always easy, but it does have many benefits. Humor puts the audience at ease. They're saying, and it creates a connection. Definitely does. So if you can if there's anything that you can add humor, and again, you have to know humor, like Vivek said, because of the culture. So it's very important, your audience. If you're trying to be humorous, you could actually upset some people. So be very careful. But it is the way that they can link to you, and it really helps lighten the load too. In other words, hey, we can be, you're a human being and we can laugh about it. And laughter is a very powerful tool in many ways, not only for communication, but even in health and so on. So humor is something that I've seen be very effective in communication. So if there is any that you find that would work, consider adding it and test it out. It's not easy, so you have to try and learn how to do it. Jay's obviously very good at it. I'm not too sure about anyone else. It's a challenge for me, but I still work on it and try it. And sometimes I make people laugh, but wow, it worked.
It's because my mom told me I had a face for radio, so I think that's why I'm so humorous.
There you are. Just what you said. Again, humorous. Thank you.
My participation in humor is on the other end, being willing and ready to just let the laugh happen, and that's a way of participating in it.
Well, some of the most powerful speeches I've seen have had some humor in it. Not all of them. Doesn't need it. It's not necessary. It's not easy, but it is something if you can add and you think it's appropriate, by all means. You got to make sure it's appropriate to the audience.
I often use humor with my webinars that I teach on Friday nights. And there's a specific reason why, is it keeps a couple reasons why, but one is it keeps the audience engaged and entertained. Thus they absorb what I'm teaching them more effectively, because people tend to get stressed when they're trying to learn something. They're leaning in, their eyes are squinting, and they become stressed, right? Because it's like they feel that they need to learn this, or otherwise they're going to vaporize into dust. So by adding a little bit of humor, it lets their hair down, so to speak. And that's a metaphor, Vivek. They're not actually putting their hair down. They're not taking it and putting it down. So thinking of cultural.
Now think about that. What era did that come from?
Yeah, totally.
The Victorian era or before.
I think I was born in the wrong era. So, but it helps them learn and absorb the information that's being delivered.
And it also assumes the audience to be female.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, there's something called metrosexual too, but we won't get into that world.
Men can't really let the hair down.
Yeah.
There's not much hair.
Right. So humor plays.
And I'm assuming in India there are no hippies or bikers either. Then.
Right.
Well, I was thinking of the pre-Victorian era, where all the men wore their hair up inside those funny wigs.
Yeah, the powdered wigs.
Yeah. So I mean, that letting your hair down may relate to that section. It may not be a female thing at all. So we got to be careful about assumptions that we make, you guys.
Yeah. It was before shampoo was invented.
Yeah, right.
And I guess I'm wondering about humor. I mean, I understand the value of humor, but it seems to me that that's something that would have to be tempered in a serious message. Like I remember going to Second City in Toronto when I lived in Canada, and I would hear 500 jokes a night, but I could only remember 3 in the car ride home because I was just bombarded with them for 90 minutes, right?
Yeah, that's the other thing. Trying to remember a joke that you heard, or trying to remember
context, right? Making sure the humor's in context. So in terms of your conversation, what it is that you're trying to convey. So like for example, I'm actually going to remember Bob's Your Uncle now from Vivek. That's a really funny story. It really is. So it's all in context. But I agree. Like I remember, when I was living in TO, I went to Second City as well, and I mean
that also has a very deep cultural difference because in India, most people relate to one another in terms of relation. You never call somebody just by their first name. After the first name, you add some relation, whatever that is, brother, uncle, whatever. So typically it's as I said, it's a cultural thing. You typically don't use just the first name. You add Bob, uncle.
Well, that's so good to have you, Vivek, because of that. You know, you're putting an interesting twist on communication, and it is very important, again, to know your audience. So, and humor is the same. It's not a necessity, but it can help. And as Jay said, rightly so, it can really have a good impact and relax the audience, and they're not so stressed. Oh, I got to learn this. I got to learn this, and they will remember a lot better if you've told them that.
I've come across, sorry, can I just say one more thing? Excuse me. I've come across situations where in sales situations, where I've spoken to different people, different business owners who actually are part of a franchise, speaking to these different peoples from different locations, really, you have to kind of morph into the kind of conversation. Quick example, I deal with a lot of Mary Maid franchise locations, some in Canada and some in the US. And I find that like the ones in the US, specifically in the middle part of the US, I tend to adopt what they say. For example, I'll say y'all on occasion, you know, just to kind of get that connection with them. And so like, yeah, and that works really well. I was able to close the sale without any issue, right? And just a couple of days ago, I closed another sale with Vancouver location, and that was a really interesting one too. It was a female entrepreneur, probably I'm guessing based on our conversation, you know, in her 50s kind of thing, because she said her daughter's the manager and stuff. So I'm building that avatar as I'm speaking to her, and she sound like she's the one that dropped the first joke, you know, so which is cool. So then I started kind of going towards that route of the conversation, and we ended up having a really good conversation in terms of the sales funnel, you know, telling them the advantages of using our services, you know, giving them an example of someone who's used our services, and adding little bits of humor within the conversation, and it works really, really well. And so my point here is to really understand not only your audience, but especially if it's a one-on-one conversation with an individual and you're trying to close the sale, really get that vibe as to who they are, you know, because some people are going to be more serious than others, you know, so you got to really, I guess you can call it, feel them out, you know, a little bit in terms of who they are, in terms of their personality, and try to marry a little bit of that personality into your conversation with the person, so that because that certainly does help the sale.
Very true. Thanks, Jay. That's a great example of all of the principles, really. And the last one I'll mention are distractions. And there are a lot of distractions. For example, Jay, when you said TO, not everybody knows what TO is. Having lived in TO, I know what you're talking about. TO stands for Toronto, Ontario, or TO is the first two letters of Toronto. But not everyone would know when you mentioned that. So that can be a distraction. People say, TO? What's TO? You've lost them. Now they're not listening to you. They're trying to wonder, well, what did he say? What's TO? There's an example of where you have to be careful, and that's a simple distraction and a simple example. Or overusing a single word. I listen to a specific podcast about marketing quite regularly, and I have listened, I think I mentioned this once before on this, but I listen to about an hour-long podcast while I'm doing some exercise, and I counted over 770 filler words in that time. And that's a distraction. And the fella actually said, oh, I went to Toastmasters once, and I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I am. Now, talking about filler words, the ahs and ums, I did in my conversation with Lowell Ann, she said, well, what could I do about it? Here was a suggestion I made. If you are videoing, and we are videoing this, and you want to, just watch your own video and count how many ahs and ums you used. It will have an impact on you. In Toastmasters, we have an ah-um counter who counts. And when you are the ah-um counter, you become so much more aware. So be your own ah-um counter. It can help you if you watch a video. You're going to show us something. Yes?
I'm keeping track.
There you are. And it will have an impact on you. That's exactly what we do. And that's how we solve the It is great. It counts how many times you say it, particularly, or anyone else, if you want, but you have an counter. There's a lot of other distractions. Facial expressions, our demeanor, the way we're dressed. You have to try and be appropriate. And you don't, your hands can be a distraction. If you're waving them around, people say, oh, why is that? Again, you lose them. Or if you have your hands in your pockets, that's also a distraction. So what do you do with your hands? You normally just let them hang by your side. And when you start talking, then eventually they will start moving. It's often a challenge. But there are so many things that can cause distractions. It's also our vocal variety. I mean, Hedi was asking about that. If we talk softly or we talk too loud, that can be a distraction. We talk too fast and we start, getting in a hurry, and then all of a sudden we lose them. All of these are items that can affect distractions. And I learned that before I was in Toastmasters, when I worked in theater as a stage manager. One of the best examples of a distraction was we had a play where we had smoke machine, which was ice. What do you call that? Ice, the frozen ice, can't remember it.
Dry ice.
Dry ice, thank you.
Yeah.
To make smoke. Well, somebody had left, we had the smoke machine going, and we had the curtain closed, but somebody had left the door open in the back of the stage door. And when we opened the curtain, all the smoke went into the audience. So the first few rows of the audience disappeared in smoke. Now, talk about a distraction. There was no way anybody was paying attention to what was trying to go on stage. They're all looking at all this smoke covering half of the audience. I learned that you try and avoid having distractions if you're trying to get a message. So even in theater, if you have a distraction, and another example is you have the stage set and somebody closes the door and it starts moving. Well, they're not listening. They're looking at the set moving. They're not listening to what so that's where I learned about distractions. And it's so true. That's a method of communication in theater. It's so true when you're talking to people. So watch for distractions and try and avoid them. Sometimes we get nervous and we start pacing back and forth. Well, they're not listening to you anymore. They're watching you pace back and forth because of your nervousness. So there are so many things. And their mind, as soon as you say something that they don't relate to or they see something, they're stop listening to you. So distractions, that's what MASH-D stands for. It's knowing about your audience, so you give the message, the stories, using humor and distractions. This is something that I created when I was coaching some people in contests. We're doing speech contests right at the moment in Toastmasters, and I'm actually in a contest on Monday, and I'm going through it saying, what's my message? Who's my audience? What stories can I tell that will relate the message? Is there any humor I can use, and how can I avoid distractions? Make sure I'm dressed properly, make sure I'm look the part that I'm trying to play. And that applies to all types of communication. So MASH-D are some very simple but very powerful communication principles that I believe in.
It's a lovely way to put a lot of information into a very short, easily remembered place. Yeah. So Hedi, no, Elena, I think I saw you waving. Did I? No? Yes?
Yes. Well, it just, while Ralfred was talking, it reminded me a bit of the process you go through for job interviews and how you're anticipating the questions and what you're going to be asked. And then, you're all uptight about that. You might want to throw in a little joke just to kind of ease the pressure. And if you can manage, it kind of reminds me of if you get asked a question, say, a common question would be something like, how did you increase sales? Or, how did you increase productivity? That sort of thing. So if you can, one, relate the story, and two, make it funny, that person's going to remember the story. So you've actually covered kind of all three things. You've covered, your capability, your story, and your joke all in the same story. So yeah, it's kind of like going on a job interview. It sounds like a lot of pressure. I'm kind of nervous now.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, and it is so true. It's perfect example of going on a job interview and how to prepare for that. I helped a lot of people. I was in the recruiting business, ran my own business for many years when I was in TO, or Toronto. And one of the things I always said to them, you have a resume, go through your resume beforehand and think about what you did so you can tell the story. When they ask you, how did you increase sales? Say, oh, that's similar to the time when I worked at ABC company, which is on the resume. And you mention and you tell a story of what you did. People will remember that, and they'll say, oh, that's the person who increased the sales at ABC company. I really was impressed with that. And you have a much better chance. The biggest mistake that most of us make, and I have made the same mistake, is after the interview, we said, oh, when they asked me that question, I should have told them about that time. Well, the time to do the thinking is before you walk into the interview. Go through your resume and say, what have I done? What were some of the accomplishments that should be on your resume? I increased the sales. And they might ask, oh, how did you increase the sales? Well, you can remember because you thought of it beforehand, before you walked in, and you know the stories to tell. So thanks for bringing that up, because it's exactly, this applies to job interviews.
Yeah.
Who's your audience? What are they looking for? What's the message you want? I'm the best person for the job. What stories can you tell them? Is there any humor? And, avoid distractions, So it works perfect in a job interview. So thanks for bringing that up.
That is good. It's good. So, Bill, it looks like you have something to share with us. You need to unmute, Bill.
Well, one of the things you should do if you want to communicate effectively is remember to unmute yourself. But I wanted to just, I know we're getting close to the end, so I wanted to share Fred's website link again. I have put it in the VCP plugin a couple of times, so I don't see anybody in the theater today. I think we're going to save some money on cleaning staff, but I just want people who come back in the replay to know that there's some great information on Fred's website.
Could I show that website? Do we have time to do that?
Oh, yes. Let's take the time.
Okay. I'll just show you what we're referring to, what that link would bring up. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. Okay. Now I have to say show. Oh, I have to go back. Say share my screen. Share screen. Match the share screen. So are you seeing the screen now? This is the link will take you to this website. Are you seeing it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and it goes through what we've just spoken about. So if you really want to find out the message, what is the purpose, the audience, stories, humor, and about distractions. So again, it's just a great way of you saying, oh, what was that he said? What did they say? There is a written article that I posted back in December of last year about MASHD. Okay. So you can find it there.
I just hope Jamie Farr, Alan Alda, Loretta Swit, Henry Morgan, all these people don't start coming after you. Those are the cast members of MASH, the TV show.
Yeah. Well, this is the D version of.
Oh, right. Okay.
MASH D.
I thought you were going to talk about MASH. I was like, oh, that's my favorite show. I love watching MASH.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
So that's what I wanted to cover. If there's any other questions or comments, but I really appreciate the input from all of you. It's been wonderful, and I was hoping that it would, get some discussion going. And all of you have added something or asked questions. So thank you.
Any final comments or questions that come to mind for anyone? Now's your chance.
Quick. Yeah. So, you know, I think what Fred said was terrific. Everything really resonated, whether it be through spoken word or through written word. I think a lot of it conveys in writing as well. But I think it's also important to remind ourselves that we are our worst critics, and not to overjudge yourself when you walk away from a meeting or any kind of presentation that you do. It's okay to in my opinion, you know, obviously if you're doing it a lot, then that's something that it means that you need to work on your audience and your delivery a little bit more. But I don't think personally it's a real big deal. You know, for example, I never, like my webinars, I do my PowerPoint, like I prepare the PowerPoint, but I never practice it because I want to make it as authentic as possible and not so staged. So, you know, because I think if in your videos, if you become really staged, it's not as interesting. So, you know, I think it's to be human, you know, and it obviously depends on the situation, you know, but I think be more human than be perfect.
Well, if it's staged, we begin to question the authenticity, don't we? Yeah.
I've watched what we call the world champion of public speaking, and you do see some people who have staged it. They do not do well. So it has to be, again, Jay, it's a very valid point. You got to be real. You got to be yourself. You're not trying to be something you're not. And that's where you see people lose the audience as well. So great point. Excellent point. You don't want to overdo it and be perfect and memorize word for word. It shows. It definitely shows. And people, you lose them. So thanks for that. That's a very good point. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to be yourself.
Although you can carry the being yourself a little too far. Yeah. I think you and I may have mentioned this in our conversation. I watched a video on YouTube here not long ago, and the person presenting, every other word was the F word. Almost every other word.
Yeah.
So, or another one is the younger generation, everything is like. So, well, I guess it's back to knowing who your audience is. I certainly wasn't that guy's audience.
Well, when I work with young people, this is something that we have them do, count and see how many times they say like. And sometimes it is a distraction, and they don't not even aware that they're doing it. And once they become aware, it changes. Yes, definitely, because it is a distraction ultimately.
Yeah. So balancing between what Jay just said, don't beat yourself up and think you have to be perfect, but be aware. So
yeah, that reminds me how we as Canadians say "a," and you move to a foreign country where I'm dealing with local Belizeans. I'm also dealing with a lot of American people. I mean, the conversation will go on for an hour or a half hour or whatever, and all of a sudden I let "a" slip, and they go, "Oh, Canadian, eh?"
I get that.
They think you're hearing impaired.
I get that even in Canada, because I come from the East Coast, and I'm told over and over that I pronounce many words in the East Coast way.
Yeah, and I'm the same way.
Yeah, well, you come from the East Coast too, don't you?
I actually put an H in front of H, so.
I love being taken for a Canadian.
Well, I certainly don't mind it.
Yeah, I don't mind it at all.
Believe me, so do Americans.
That's my point.
That's his point.
Yeah, I've had people tell me that I have a thick Canadian accent with my webinars.
Well, and
what is a thick Canadian accent?
And I mean, you've been playing with that in line with your humor when you start talking about niche or niche. And I heard somebody last night, I think, go Z or Z. So
that's a giveaway. Yeah, I say Z. That's my giveaway right there.
Yeah.
So now I want to jump in with my non-English accent. And I wanted to say to Fred that I'm very glad that your presentation comes so timely for me, because today we are accepted for speakers in the conference in May. So we have to create our presentation, 20 minutes talk. And I will think about that. And I will also, Mark, have listen. He didn't listen to it, to what you said. And we will take this as a criteria. That's very, very good. I sort of know these things, but sort of. And it's so much better to have it really as a list to be aware of. And thank you. And we will practice once or two or three times before and watch it then. But in the moment, that will be very different. I mean, that it will never be the same words, So, but only to see how we get through, how the time is, and where we have to go quicker or slower.
So what's a problem with the way I speak?
Heidi, you should make your speech in opera. Tragedy.
Yeah. I can sing.
Yes, she can.
Well, I'm glad you dropped by.
Mark speaking in Vulcan.
Thank you.
You're speaking in Vulcan?
We speak in Wisconsin, no?
Vulcan.
I come from Wisconsin, up there. Yeah.
Oh dear. So now we're getting into the silly world. So I think that's our signal that we need to close the streaming right now shortly, and I invite everyone to please mute as we go through the scrolling end. And also invite everyone to stay on for more conversation if they have time. I know that life does happen. So thank you so much, Fred. That was really, really helpful and really useful. And thanks to everyone else. So here we go. I am going to start the scrolling ending now.